Yes, folks, welcome back to the channel on a very wet and windy day, but also welcome back to this series where we're specifically looking at your conditioning-based drills. Now, last week in part one, we looked at your 45-15s, which help you develop your aerobic base. So if you haven't seen that one already, I do recommend you go and check that one out. This week, though, we're looking at a drill which is going to help you develop your high-speed running. So without much further ado, let's get into it. So like I said last week in part one, these drills are specifically designed for under 16s and under 18s, under 18s into adult football. And the reason I say that, when we're slightly younger, you want to be focusing on learning how to move well, learning how to change direction, learning how to accelerate, jump, land, and all those relay races which you can hide some really good movements in. So if you are a young player, or if you work with young players, I do recommend going and checking out those videos because they're specifically designed for those age groups. These videos, however, you may be an under 18s footballer, maybe going into adult football for the first time, or you might just be an adult footballer wanting to improve your fitness. These ones are for you. So last week we looked at the 45-15s where we worked up and down the pitch. This week the drill is called the 25s and we're going to be working across the pitch. So let's have a look. So like I said, this drill is specifically looking at developing your high-speed running, but what does that even mean? Now, if you're fortunate enough to use GPS units like we do with our players here, high-speed running is classed as any distance that you cover over 5.5 meters per second, so the speed of 5.5 meters per second. Now, there's the top threshold of 7 meters per second. Anything above that is classed as sprint distance, so the really high-intensity stuff. Now, that depends on brand and the threshold you set, but typically it's 7 meters per second. Anything above that is really high-intensity stuff. We're looking at that sort of in-between stage, that 5.5 meters per second to 7 meters per second speed. So don't get too bogged down with this. Essentially, it's when you're not fully sprinting, but you're still working really, really hard. Now, for reference, Premier League players, academy level, under 23s and under 18s players, they can, depending on position, cover up to 1,000 meters and more of high-speed running in a game. So it's very high demand. And the research suggests the more exposure you have to high-speed running, the better prepared you are for the demands of the game. So that's exactly what this drill is for. We're trying to prepare you for those high demand, those high intensities, those high-speed stuff. All right, so that's what we're looking for. Now, like I said last week in the part one video, these drills are scalable. So if you're slightly newer to these higher intensity runs, what I'd recommend is you ease yourself in. So on the lower intensity end of this drill, if you want to though, if you back yourself, you think you got in the locker, by all means go in at the higher intensity end. But the drill looks like this. You have a maximum of 25 seconds to get from this touch line to the opposite touch line and back again. You will then rest for 25 seconds and you will go again, rest for 25 seconds, go again, rest for 25 seconds. Now, how long you go for, what I will do in the description, I will put a breakdown of the beginner, intermediate, pro, and elite levels for this exact drill. Okay, but what you can start to do is you can start to shave a few seconds off. So rather than going 25 seconds, you do it in sort of 23, maybe even 22 if you really want to go on the high intensity end. But also, a little note on this is some pitches are slightly wider than others. So if you're on a really, really wide pitch, 25 seconds might be a push. If you're on a really narrow pitch, the 25 seconds might actually be quite easy. So that's where you can scale it a little bit for you on the pitch that you have access to and things like that. But also that you can then start to play around with those seconds. What I recommend you do is don't go below 20 seconds because actually covering a width of a pitch in 10 seconds and back again, obviously for the next 10 seconds, is actually quite high intensity and you might start clocking into sort of sprint distance. What we're looking for this drill is we're looking at that awkward in-between stage where we're not quite going into that intensity yet. Okay, that comes next week. So have a play around with it, have a play around with the intensities, and like I said, depending on your pitch, you might need to try and adjust those times slightly. But the important thing with this one is it's a 1-to-1 work to rest time ratio. I'd always recommend you do rest for 25 seconds though. Okay, last week with the 45-15s, it was a 3-to-1 work to rest time ratio. Because this week we're working at a higher intensity, we do want a little bit more rest and we don't want to be working for as long. Okay, but with this one, like I said, look in the description, have a look at the breakdowns. We don't need to be working for sort of 5, 6 to 7, maybe even 8-minute blocks like we did with the 45-15s. We need to be working for slightly less time because it's a more high intensity drill. So have a look at the description, see how they look, play around with it and make it work for you. So there you have it. That's the 25s run, specifically looking at your high-speed running. Now, for reference, I used to use this drill quite a lot with the under-16s age group at a Premier League professional academy, trying to get them ready for the match and training demands of under-18s football, which is full-time football, so much higher intensity. But we also used to use it within training sessions, sometimes at the end, and sometimes even at the end of matches, if we needed to try and top players up in order for them to hit certain thresholds in terms of their high-speed running distance. We were lucky we had live GPS, which we could see on the iPad like we do with our players here, how far players have gone at any given point. So if we needed to top them up, we could. Now, we use the 22-second version, so there and back in 22 seconds, rest for 25 and go again. But like I said, check the description out to try and find the intensity version which suits you best. Okay, so if you're slightly newer to it, like I said, start at the beginning and work your way through it. But that'll do it for this one. Thank you ever so much for watching. If you haven't already, check out part 1, the 45-15s, but get ready for part 3 where we're specifically looking at those really high intensities. Now we're looking at building into those sprints, so get ready for that one.